Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. Let's continue the side story of Scorched Dragon Velgrynd. In the previous episode, Velgrynd learned about the dire situation of the world she had entered. The humans here were exceptionally weak, and without her help, their fate against the invading phantoms would be utter destruction. To protect the bearer of Rudra's soul, Velgrynd assumed the name Dragon Phoenix and began assisting the Japan Empire. In this episode, more of Velgrynd's connection to this world would be revealed, and Gensei Araki's other prized disciple, Masahiko Amari, would make his debut. So, let's get started. After the earlier commotion, the Japan Empire's military strategy meeting officially began, with the presiding officer explaining the current state of affairs. The meeting was described at length in the text, but I'll summarize it as concisely as possible. This meeting compiled all the information the Japan Empire had gathered thus far. First, humanity was now at the brink of extinction. The phantom race was not only immensely powerful but had also taken control of the fleets of 3 major nations. This included not just the Japan Empire. Both the United States of Azalea and the rival Chiefs Republic of China had their fleet commanders possessed by phantoms, resulting in those fleets also falling under phantom control. The first conclusion drawn was that deploying soldiers into battle would inevitably lead to their possession by phantoms. Based on the information presented at the meeting and what Velgrynd already knew, it was confirmed that even the weakest phantoms were at the evil heaven mystic level, making them virtually insurmountable for this world's strongest fighters. The only potential solution seemed to be uniting the strongest warriors from all nations to face the enemy together. However, in this climate of fear and distrust, with national leaders unable to guarantee their own country's safety, none of them were willing to send their strongest fighters to the Japan Empire for a potentially life-threatening summit. This was the predicament the Japan Empire currently faced. The presiding officer expressed frustration, noting that all the overtures they had extended, even to their allies in the rival Chiefs Republic of China, had been rejected. The room fell silent. A solution was urgently needed, as the longer they delayed, the more phantoms would descend upon this world, diminishing any chance of victory. Despite the urgency, Velgrynd showed no intention of stepping in immediately. Over her long journey, Velgrynd herself had undergone changes. She now understood that if humanity's weak nations were to survive and develop, they had to learn to confront and resolve their challenges on their own. Relying entirely on Velgrynd would leave humanity with no future. Over the next few days, Velgrynd seemed very relaxed and made several visits to the Imperial Library to study the history of this world. Meanwhile, the people of this world made no progress in uniting against the threat. Despite the looming danger, the nations remained mired in distrust, unable to come together even in the face of impending disaster. If Velgrynd intervened directly, the threat of the phantoms could be eliminated immediately. However, under such circumstances, humanity would inevitably continue their mutual wars. Seeing their lack of progress while knowing the phantoms were running out of patience, Velgrynd decided to help humanity unite. Why did Velgrynd feel compelled to assist? During her time in the library, Velgrynd conducted an in-depth study of this world's history. In doing so, she discovered many things that felt nostalgic, names of nations and rulers, for instance. The Holy Arcea Empire closely resembled the Arcea Kingdom she had once helped. Similarly, the name of the United States of Azalea's president, George Hayes, perfectly matched her memories. This wasn't mere coincidence. After thorough research, Velgrynd uncovered a startling fact. Over different eras in this world, various holders of Rudra's soul fragments had emerged. In other words, she had come to this world multiple times in the past, and the nations now present had either directly or indirectly benefited from Velgrynd's help. Thus, uniting the strongest fighters from each country was within her power. Velgrynd noted that the military command of the Japan Empire was far too slow in taking action. Considering the urgency of the situation, she decided to step in. Ignoring the reactions of the other officers, she took a seat at the communication equipment used by the presiding officer. Her plan was simple: leverage her past connections or deeds in these countries to gain their attention. Once they agreed to her invitation, she would use a teleportation portal to bring them here, bypassing cumbersome negotiations and saving travel time. As mentioned before, Velgrynd could teleport freely within a fixed space-time, much like Mai Furuki, thanks to the powers of her ultimate skill, Lord of Flaming God. She began with the United States of Azalea. Velgrynd didn't bother with formalities and directly demanded that the person on the other end relay her message to the president, stating that Velgrynd needed to speak with him. Unsurprisingly, the respondent sounded irritated. Anyone would be annoyed by such an inexplicable call. However, Velgrynd paid no mind. As long as the message reached the president, that was all that mattered. She quickly ended the call. The aforementioned George Hayes was the son of Loran Hayes, a former holder of Rudra's soul fragment. As the former president of the United States of Azalea, Loran Hayes was known as a genius con artist. As previously mentioned, Velgrynd lacked the ability to traverse time and space at will like Rimuru. Instead, her movements were guided by the presence of Rudra's soul fragments. In fact, Velgrind's previous descent into this world occurred only a few decades ago. At that time, the current emperor of the Japan Empire had already been born, but Velgrynd was unaware that he was also a holder of Rudra's soul fragment. This was because such fragments only emit their radiant glow in moments of life and death. Velgrynd could only traverse time and space when these fragments called out to her. The growth and success of the United States of Azalea were inseparable from Velgrind's assistance, and George Hayes himself had received years of guidance from her. With Velgrind's name mentioned, there was no doubt the response would be immediate. With this in mind, Velgrynd quickly switched channels and began contacting the Holy Arcea Empire, demanding they respond to the Great Japan Conquering Empire's invitation. To sweeten the deal, she promised to prepare a new so-called divine weapon for their nation if they complied. Without waiting for a reply, Velgrynd cut the connection again. The divine weapon referred to one of the 12 mythical-level weapons Velgrynd had forged for the top warriors of the Holy Arcea Empire at its inception. Today, only 7 of these legendary weapons remain publicly known, their wielders revered as the 7 divine treasures of the Holy Arcea Empire. The 8th weapon and its wielder were closely guarded state secrets, while the 9th weapon remained ownerless and hidden in national custody. In diplomatic negotiations, anyone brazen enough to promise a divine weapon would ensure their message reached the highest levels, whether believed or not. Velgrind's negotiation tactics relied on this understanding. Moments later, as if to confirm her expectations, responses came from the upper echelons of the other nations. After confirming Velgrind's identity, they immediately accepted the Japan Empire's invitation. One by one, Velgrynd extended invitations to the other nations. Once they agreed, she used her space-time connection ability to open teleportation portals and transport their leaders to the Japan Empire. In no time, the upper ranks of all 5 great nations were gathered in one place. Of course, the process wasn't entirely smooth. Many doubted Velgrind's identity and challenged her upon arriving in the Japan Empire. For instance, members of the Dragon Fist faction from the rival Chiefs Republic of China raised suspicions. Velgrynd had once guided the founder of their faction, but so many years had passed that her name had long been forgotten. The current leader of the faction, the so-called strongest martial artist of humanity, Shenhua, issued a challenge to Velgrynd. The result, however, was a decisive and effortless victory for Velgrynd. Afterward, the others came to trust her identity and began earnestly discussing the current situation and the combat strength of their nations. The rival Chiefs Republic of China and the United States of Azalea both faced hostage crises. When the Phantoms invaded, they quietly possessed the families of influential figures, gradually expanding their numbers, increasing their influence, and taking control of the governing class. The rival Chiefs Republic of China's recent aggressive war was directly due to the possession of several high-ranking officials by Phantoms. Meanwhile, in Azalea's military, even the president's son, Emil Hayes, grandson of Loran Hayes, a former Rudra soul fragment holder, had been possessed by a phantom. Just recently, Emil, acting as a phantom emissary, delivered an ultimatum to both Azalea and China. He declared that the nations could either submit peacefully, in which case the phantoms would allow their citizens to retain their free will, or resist and be reduced to nothing more than vessels for phantom possession. It was evident that China and Azalea had far more detailed intelligence on the phantoms. According to their reports, the phantoms' objective wasn't the destruction of humanity but sustainable domination. Their strategy involved controlling humanity while allowing them to produce more suitable hosts for possession, preserving the ruling class as a means to maintain control over the human continents. The situation in the Great Rosium dynasty was the worst. By the time contact was made, the phantoms had already breached their royal palace, and even their most powerful protector, the enigmatic monk Pulcinella, had fallen into enemy hands. A slightly later attempt at contact might have revealed the complete collapse of the nation. Because of this dire circumstance, when Velgrynd offered assistance, the Emperor of Rosium agreed to her terms without hesitation and came to join the meeting. The Council, now united with the combined strength of humanity's leaders, officially began. The first priority was to eliminate mutual distrust. Velgrynd, with her ability to identify phantoms, assured everyone that no one present was possessed. The Japanese Minister of the Army cautiously inquired what kind of strategy would be effective against the phantoms. While this was a humiliating question for the leader of Japan's military, relying on others' strength was seen as disgraceful. Given the overwhelming power of the invaders, no one reproached him. On the contrary, everyone present shared the same hopeful anticipation of Velgrynd's answer. Velgrynd explained that deploying troops would be meaningless, a conclusion the leaders had likely already reached. Firearms and similar weapons would also be ineffective against the phantoms, and would only increase human casualties. There were only two viable options: leave everything to Velgrynd or have humanity's strongest warriors make one last attempt at a final challenge. Velgrind's words, though filled with contempt for the prideful warriors, reflected reality, and everyone knew it. However, the strong among them exchanged glances and came to a unanimous decision. This was humanity's problem to solve, and they could not continually rely on Velgrynd-sama. As long as there was something they could do, they were willing to risk their lives for one final effort. With Velgrynd's protection, they feared no opponent, no matter how unimaginable their strength, as Velgrynd's protection was akin to divine providence. The assembly implored Velgrynd to grant them one last chance to fight and destroy the underworld gate summoning the phantoms, vowing to defend their homeland to the death. Seeing their resolve, Velgrynd smiled calmly and said this was the answer she had hoped to hear. She promised to provide some additional assistance. With a wave of her hand, Velgrynd upgraded the warriors' weapons, transforming them into mythical-level equipment. Empowered by their enhanced gear and unwavering determination, everyone prepared for the final counterattack. The perspective shifted to the Phantoms' base of operations. The Phantoms had set up camp on a small oceanic continent, Atlantis, and were tirelessly working to expand the underworld gate. The reason was simple: the gate, in its current size, was insufficient to summon their most powerful leader, Cornu. It needed to be significantly enlarged. In the conference room of the base, a man with slicked back black hair sat in silent contemplation. His identity was that of an adjutant who had once served one of the 7 angels of origin, Cornu, during the Celestial Era. Before mutating into a phantom, he was an active cherub-class angel. Now, he inhabited the body of a man named Masahiko Amari. This particular human body proved to have an extraordinary compatibility with the phantom's essence, allowing the adjutant to wield his original full strength. This unparalleled power, when translated into existence points, amounted to approximately 10 million. Well, it's unclear if the author made a mistake here, but 10 million does seem rather exaggerated. However, after acquiring a human body, the adjutant, now possessing Masahiko, began experiencing a profound shift in his thoughts. His sense of self became severely fractured. Was he Masahiko Amari, or the phantom entity possessing him? In this magical scarce world, human bodies were incredibly fragile, but their minds were correspondingly free and immensely resilient, with unparalleled willpower. In contrast, phantoms, who had once been angels, lacked robust self-awareness. Angels below the Dominion rank often function like automatons, executing orders with mechanical precision and minimal individuality. Because of this, it was theoretically possible for humans to reclaim control of their bodies from the phantoms. Should this happen on a large scale, the order the phantoms had painstakingly built in this world would collapse entirely. Now, as a phantom inhabiting Masahiko, the adjutant found his objectives in flux. While logic dictated that expanding the underworld gate to allow Kornu, one of the three mystic admirals, to manifest in this world was the best course of action, the immense power he gained from Masahiko's body planted a different idea in his mind. Yes, Masahiko was contemplating the destruction of the gate altogether, and instead ruling this world by himself. The conflict between the phantom's consciousness and Masahiko's own thoughts created a chaotic internal struggle. Masahiko began to rationalize that ruling with human hands would be more accepted by this world. If he was thinking this way, perhaps other phantom comrades inhabiting human bodies might share similar sentiments. But then another thought struck him: who could truly be considered an ally, and who might be an enemy? This cascade of fragmented thoughts left Masahiko's head pounding with pain. At that moment, he received intelligence from his phantom subordinates. The current situation was alarming. The strongest fighters and leaders from various nations had suddenly disappeared. Both Masahiko and the enigmatic monk Pulcinella immediately sensed something ominous. Just when the phantoms thought they were on the verge of total victory, these humans had somehow evaded their seemingly airtight surveillance. It was clear their real counterattack was about to begin. Masahiko and the enigmatic monk Pulcinella were among the rare elite powerhouses of this world. Pulcinella, who possessed extensive knowledge of human history, joined the others in contemplating the possibility of humanity's counterattack against the phantoms. Pulcinella concluded that humanity had no chance of victory. The only person capable of even slightly threatening the phantoms was Shinhua, the inheritor of Dragon Fist. As Pulcinella recounted, Dragon Fist originated with its founding patriarch, who was said to have been guided by a female warrior named Dragon Phoenix. This added to Masahiko's growing sense of unease. At that moment, Delia, a phantom-possessed warrior from Arcia, interjected, stating that Arcia also had legends of a goddess, Caldina, who guided the kingdom's founding emperor. Furthermore, Caldina had supposedly forged 12 mythical weapons for Arcia, one of which Delia now wielded. Delia remarked that even now, she could not fully unleash the power of her mythic-level spear. Masahiko and the others were visibly shaken. In a world so devoid of magicule, the existence of mythic-level weapons was inconceivable. Yet here they were, not just one but 12 of them. This suggested that someone capable of forging such miracles either currently existed or once had existed in this world. Few entities could achieve such a feat. Combined with Caldina's implied association with the color red, Masahiko reached a shocking conclusion. The only one who could have done this was Scorched Dragon Velgrynd. Masahiko never imagined that Velgrynd would appear in such an obscure world. The realization sent shockwaves through him and the others, especially Emil Hayes, the son of George Hayes. Overwhelmed, Emil began muttering Velgrynd's name like a madman, completely disregarding his surroundings. As a child, Emil had memories of Velgrynd. Velgrynd had stayed with Laurent Hayes until his passing at the age of 62, during which George Hayes was already 27 and had fathered Emil. For Emil, Velgrynd evoked pure terror, and the thought of opposing her began to fracture Phantom's control over him. Emil's human consciousness resurfaced as he recalled the beautiful woman who was simultaneously grandmotherly and sisterly. He remembered the warmth of her embrace from his childhood. Finally, Emil called out Velgrynd's name, a call that became the spark for an explosive turn of events. Responding to Emil's call, Velgrynd effortlessly bypassed the magical barriers the phantoms had set and appeared in their midst. Even Masahiko, typically calm and composed, was utterly unprepared for such a development. Although he had confirmed Velgrynd's presence, he never anticipated encountering her before having time to formulate a strategy. Thus, the Scorched Dragon's adventure entered its final chapter. Alright, that's all for this video. TenSura Volume 17 Chapter 2 is perhaps the longest chapter in the series, with its story told in painstaking detail, featuring extensive dialogue and richly layered backgrounds. I highly recommend reading the novel itself for the full experience. As for Masahiko, who was possessed by Kornu's adjutant and allegedly reached 10 million existence points, that part feels implausible. To put it in perspective, Pico and Gracia, both of whom are 7 angels of origin on the same tier as Kornu, never showcase such exaggerated power levels, let alone in a magicule-deprived world like this. A figure closer to 1 million would seem more reasonable. The next episode will cover the final battle and conclude Velgrind's side story. The upcoming story will be just as thrilling. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.